that. Yeah.
I believe so, yeah.
And then we're doing our beauty tutorial.
Okay, we are on live.
Live.
Well, good evening, everyone. Muy buenas noches a todos. Cultura UABC les da la bienvenida a la charla retrospectiva El Universo Narrativo de Laura Albert, en el marco del Encuentro Internacional de Escritores Tiempo de Literatura, edición pandémica. Cultura UABC welcomes you to this retrospective talk, The Narrative Universe of Laura Albert, with Fernanda Melchor and in the Writers' International Conference Tiempo de Literatura. I'll start reading a little about their bios. Laura Albert has won international acclaim for her fiction. Writing as G.T. Leroy, she is the author of the best-selling novel Sarah and the Hair is Deceitful Above All Things, and the novella Harold's End. Sarah and the Hair is Deceitful Above All Things, reissued by HarperCollins, have also released as audiobooks by Blackstone Publishing. Laura Albert is the subject of Jesse Feuerstedt's feature documentary author, The J.T. Leroy Story, and Lynn Hershman's lesson film, The Ballad of J.T. Leroy. She has written for the New York Times, The Forward, the London Times, Spin, Man About Town, Vogue, Film Comment, Interview, L'Equipe, Sport and Style, Filmmaker, ID, and others. More recently, the cover article of Man About Town and her reflections of fashion for Besto G. A writer for the HBO series Deadwood, she also wrote the original script for Gus Van Sant's Elephant and was the film's associate producer. She has written the short films variant for Dre Lightfoot and Content Mood, and Dreams of Levitation and Warfare of Pageantry for Sharif Hamza and Knownness. Bueno, Laura Albert ha ganado elogios internacionales por su obra. Como J.T. Leroy es autora de las novelas Sarah y El corazón es engañoso por encima de todas las cosas, y la novela Harold's End. Sarah and the Heart is Deceitful Above All Things, reeditado por HarperCollins, también han sido lanzados como audiolibros por Blackstone Publishing. Laura Albert es el tema del largometraje documental de Jay Feuerstedt, autor de The J.T. Leroy Story y la película de Lynn Hershman lesson, The Ballad of J.T. Leroy. Ha escrito para el New York Times, The Forward, the London Times, Spin, Man About Town, Vogue, Film Comment, Interview, L'Equipe, Sport and Style, Filmmaker, ID y otros. Y más recientemente, el artículo de portada de Man About Town y sus reflexiones sobre moda para Besto G. Escribió la serie de HBO Deadwood, también escribió el guion original de Elephant de Gus Van Sant y fue productora asociada de la película. Ha escrito los cortometrajes Radiance para Drew Lightfoot y Content Mode, y Dreams of Levitation and Warfare of Pageantry para Sharif Hamza y Knownness. And on the other side, we have Fernanda Melchor. She was born in Veracruz, Mexico in 1982, is widely recognized as one of the most exciting new voices of Mexican literature. Her most recent novel, Hurricane Season, New Directions 2020, has won the Anna Segers Award and a place in the shortlist for the International Booker Prize. Bueno, en español, Fernanda no necesita una introducción, pero voy a leer un poco de ella. Es autora de las novelas Temporada de Huracanes y Falsa Liebre y del libro de crónicas Aquí no es Miami. Su trabajo ha merecido diversos certámenes de literatura y periodismo en México y el mundo, como el premio Anna Segers en 2019, el Premio Internacional de Literatura de Alemania 2019 y el premio PEN a la Excelencia Literaria 2018, y actualmente es miembro del Sistema Nacional de Editores. Well, thank you so much, Fernanda and Laura, for accepting the invitation to Tiempo de Literatura. We're really glad to have you here. I'm gonna give a little introduction in Spanish about Laura's Albert's work, and then I'm gonna give all the time to talk about the novels and Hurricane Season and everything you want to talk about. Bueno, el trabajo de Laura Albert, como J.T. Leroy, llega en un momento de coyuntura sobre temas de género y violencia a finales de los 90s. Las novelas se convierten en un éxito en Estados Unidos y atrae la atención de sectores como la industria de Hollywood. J.T. Leroy, Laura Albert van a abordar temas como la violencia, género y situaciones de marginación en Estados Unidos. Y para la época, estamos hablando de finales de los 90, cuando comienza a convertirse en un éxito la prosa de Laura Albert, pues van a causar un quiebre en lo que se esperaba para la época, ¿no? Sobre todo los temas que se abordaban. Y bueno, con esta pequeña introducción, I'm going to give the word to Fernanda Melchor. I know she has a lot to say about Laura Albert and the influence of her work in her writing. So, Fernanda, it's up to you. We want to hear you.
Thank you, dear Michelle. Well, hello, everyone. Voy a estar hablando en inglés. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you and, of course, talking with Laura Albert, writer and artist of indisputable talent. So I really want to thank Elma Correa and Tiempo de Literatura for making this dream a reality, and to all of you for being virtually present tonight. So as our dear Michelle already has announced, I would like to take the floor to share with you some ideas, insights about Laura's work as a writer under the pseudonym of J.T. Leroy, and how her literature has influenced my own work, my ideas of what beauty is, and the limits of what can be said, what can be written, and the healing aspects and also the harmful aspects of writing fiction. So I'll start saying that I found J.T. Leroy in 2005. He was just outside the office of my first job as a journalist in the social communication department of La Universidad Veracruzana, the University of Veracruz. And I was just going to have lunch in these beautiful wooden areas that surrounds the Rectoria, the Rectoria building in Jalapa, when I saw J.T. Leroy. And he was looking at me with, these mischievous, pleading eyes, like this sensual and innocent looking. He was looking at me, and from the cover of this pink and black book, and it was an old hippie that was selling this book in a sort of mobile mini library of secondhand books, something really common in Jalapa. So I picked it up and I read the jacket and I took him home with me. And I became absolutely obsessed with the stories and adventures of Cherry Vanilla, the protagonist of Sarah. He's a young blonde boy who loves makeup and, of course, black leather miniskirts, and who dreams of one day becoming the most sought after prostitute of the truck stop where he and Sarah, his reluctant mother, live and work. So Cherry Vanilla's hubris will lead him to work first for Glad. He's sort of a super sophisticated pimp on this truck stop in the middle, somewhere in the south of the States. And then his desperate arrogance will take Cherry Vanilla to find himself exposed to many perils. He's regarded as a saint first, and then as a witch in another truck stop, and all for the sake of winning his mother's love, his mother's attention, and I think his mother's envy too. So, this is a really disturbing book, and it's incredibly amusing. It is, and it's also brutal at the same time. And it talks about what it is like to grow up depending on parents who are at the same time neglectful and cruel. Parents who are trapped in their own struggles, fighting for survival. So it talks about mothers who are themselves like little girls hurting to be held and comforted, and about absent and unreliable father figures and gifted children who are left adrift to find their fates by their own means. So back in 2005, this was exactly what I wanted to talk about, this same spirit, this same subjects. And I say subjects with reluctance because as a writer, I don't think one ever writes about subjects, but about people, and about feelings and emotion. So in 2005, I was 23 years old and barely an adult. And I just, I was struggling a lot because I just couldn't find a way to talk about the wreckage of a family from which I just escaped. So I was in search of a style. I was in search of my own way of telling things. But I was also in the look for encouragement. I was in the look for a sort of permission to finally tell the truth, to finally tell my own truth and the truth of my childhood and my youth. And I think J.T. Leroy was certainly a guide for me, something that really helped me to find my own way of telling things. So 3 years later, 3 years after, in 2008, I was 25 years old, living back in Veracruz, working the same soul killer job at the university, and writing nonfiction chronicas about what I saw in the street, low life narcos and old true crime legends. And I was still trying to write my first novel, and I was still incapable to find, like, a lot of things, like the time to write it, like the resources to have the time. And I was lacking also like the know-how. One of the most important part of writing a novel is learning what is a novel. And I didn't think I was ready to write a novel yet. And most of all, I was searching for that courage to talk the truth. So one day I go to interview this guy, Rolando, because this was in 2008, and he told me he had a story to tell me. And at that time I was like hunting stories all over town. So I could write nonfiction stories. And in fact, he had a good story. But when I visited him in his office, he was a lawyer in Veracruz. And I saw this small bookcase filled with books of Bukowski and Fante, most of all. And I was so surprised to find El Corazón es Traicionero, this book. El Corazón es Traicionero.
Wow.
It's incomplete. The title is incomplete because in English is The Heart is Deceitful Above All Things. Yeah. So it would be El Corazón es Traicionero por encima de todas las cosas. So I just, I was exploding with joy because never in my life I had met another person in Veracruz who knew who J.T. Leroy was and who loved J.T. Leroy's books also. And this guy, Rolando, he sees my complete astonishment, and in an outburst of, unexpected generosity, he decides to lend me the book. He says, yes, you can have it, and then you can return it. And of course, I'm a horrible, despicable person because I actually promised to return him. But deep in my heart, I knew that this book was lost for him. So Rolando, if you're watching this, your book is in good hands, and I'm really taking care of it. So thank you so much for this. And well, of course, I don't want to hold to the mic much longer because we are all here to listen to Laura, of course, but I feel the imperative need to convince you all to read her books. Read her books. They're available now in new editions. You can buy them even in ebook too, and you can order them from the States. Unfortunately, there are no more editions in Spanish, and that's something that must be corrected soon with new translations, because these translations are sort of too Spaniards and less Latin. So this is a plea for all the editors in Mexico to publish again these works in Spanish. So, okay, if I thought Sarah was passionate, sordid, direct, emotive, lyrical, beautiful, with the darkest sense of humor, well, the collection of stories that make up The Heart is Deceitful just blew my mind away with its beauty and its authenticity and its raw and enduring way of displaying complex emotions, repressed memories, and dark desires. So this is, The Heart is Deceitful is the account, is the testimony of a survivor. There is literally talent behind every word, but there's also intuition, voltage, blinding rage, and an exquisite, almost unbearable pain and sadness. So there's also truth, a truth that you cannot fake even if you wanted to. So at least in 2011, I managed to finish my first novel. I quit my terrible job. I lived for a year from my savings, eating beans, and well, I was single, so that wasn't a problem. And after years of reading The Heart is Deceitful, I will forever be in gratitude to your books, Laura. And I like to think that its protagonist, the protagonist of my book, Falsa Liebre, of my first novel, Andrik, is sort of a distant, dark-skinned cousin of Jeremiah, Terminator. So you show me, and I think you show all of us in the most surprising, transgressive, and courageous way how it is necessary to transform ourselves in order to turn the material of life, the pain of life, into literature. And that is why I think it never bothered me to find out that you were the one behind the literary persona of J.T. Leroy, because when I found out, I just thought, right, of course. For me, it all made sense, because as a struggling author, as a struggling artist, I was able to sense the truth that existed in your books. And I understood how difficult it is to actually, rip off the truth from one's heart in order to transform it into art. And I knew how painful and scary it is to dive into the darkest parts of our hearts and souls and turn this into words and sentences that other people is going to read, and perhaps it is one wish will understand. So thank you, Laura, for taking that bullet for us. And thank you for these beautiful works that just speak for themselves. Oh my God.
Thank you, Fernanda. I want to cry too, actually.
This is just
Laura.
What I really feel about Laura's work and the impressions, the everlasting impression her work made into my own life and work.
That I think that's what the artist wishes. It's the message in a bottle, and for me, I think you completely understand the feeling of you are an absorbent sponge and you see so much suffering and you endure so much suffering, and yet your soul is intact. You still care. And for me, it's how do you translate it so other people care? Because when I grew up, the narratives that were being told, people were not talking about physical or sexual abuse. Women, for the most part, had no voice. If you were transgendered, people were a joke and to be something that was to be feared. Gay men were allowed in the theater, but lesbian, the word was terrifying, and it had been pretty much illegal. It was illegal to run away until 1974 in the US. There was just a silence all the way around. And when they did start doing after school specials, it was always a blonde hair, blue-eyed, cute little boy that was white, blonde, marketable. Can we use foul language? Yeah?
Yeah.
Fuckable. Like a fuckable, cute little boy if you're into that, right? A cute little girl, right? And even just the way people talked in the media about people who looked different. And I did not see myself represented. And I think we learn how to disassociate, and we find art that is our North Star. And Fernanda, just thank you. It's there was work that was that for me, and there were times when I just didn't know. You feel like, can I make this? Will I survive? I'm sorry.
No, it's totally okay. I think as authors, it doesn't happen with everyone, but I feel like I have a relationship with you, even if this is the first time I speak with you and laid eyes, really with you. But I got the feeling that I know you so deeply, and I think most of my readers always think that way too and express that to myself. And it sometimes sounds a little bit scary because, as an artist, you use fiction to show yourself, but at the same time hide your face. And there's always this game of, hiding and showing, and sometimes it's scary, but at the same time, I think it is why we write, to communicate. It is why we sought publication, because we want to communicate.
Well, Oscar Wilde said, "Give a man a mask, he'll tell you the truth." And I had so much severe shame that disassociation and telling in a different way just protected me. It protected everything, and it moved the venue. And there's a quote that I love from Hannah Arendt, which she says, "All sorrows can be born if you put them into a story or tell a story about them." And I think that, to me, is how we make sense, how we invite people to care, how we, with everything that's going on, the horror that's going on in the world, it was put to me that my directive is to find a way. There's a quote that's in one of the films about me that gets it wrong. What I said was, "Any means necessary while holding the other's heart." And to me, in my work, if you truly were in the work, you understand me. It's, if you're relating with your heart and your head, if you're jerking off to a little boy, that's on you. If you bought the book because everyone else had it and you didn't even read it, and if you were available to the material, and also if you understand trauma-informed narratives and how to look, what your paradigm is. When somebody comes from trauma and they read my work and then they understood what happened, they get it. So it's, how do we take those directives and invite people to care? And then, yes, you're in commune with that. We know each other. You and I speak the exact same tongue. I got that right. It's like, I got it right away. I read I spoke, and I'm like, yes, we are make a model. It's like we are sisters. We come from that.
Definitely think we're kindred souls. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's a done deal.
I don't know if, Carla, you would like to make some question. I think you.
Yeah, I have some questions, but I want to know. I know Laura, Albert read Hurricane Season, and I want to know what do you think about the book, and how do you reflect your writing in the writing of Fernanda's book? What is your
It's beautiful. It's beautiful, right? I relate to first of all, how language just comes to you and allow it to, it's like transmigration of spirit. It just, in terms of writing, the characters occupy you and you turn yourself over. It's like filming it and you're available to what they need to tell you. And that's very present. And it's filming. To me, I compare writing to film, and to me that's what she's doing in this gorgeous work, that it's different angles of how everybody gets to see it from their point of view. And there is no truth is something that's very subjective, and the way language is used and violence is used. It's funny, I was thinking about that because I spent a portion of my life in foster care in a group home, and it was very similar, like in Deadwood, the HBO show. So that takes place in the 1870s, I think. And you needed to use language as like your rattlesnake, because next you're gonna go for a gun. So language is like, if you don't have the ability to, you're not going to tell on someone, you have to get up in somebody's face and be like, I'm gonna fuck you up. At least give the idea that you're going to. Using language, to me, it is not something that's offensive, or it's a spice. And if it wakes somebody up or shocks them, I think that is useful. It's not it's not there calling attention to itself. It's there as like the accent, so you understand these are not people in a university that don't need that language. But it's a beautiful book, and it's a service of explaining a very horrific situation while holding everyone's heart.
Thank you so much, Laura. In fact, I'm super glad that that you share your impressions of my book. I do normally in this book, I did feel like occupied by my characters. How I developed was imagining that I could hear the voices of women of this town, La Matosa, talking about the victim and the killer. And I kind of developed the way they behave and they are by listening to this, this chorus of gossiping women just saying out loud what they think and contradicting each other, and like gossiping, and I just felt totally, it was sort of like a possession, like The Exorcist a little bit sometimes. And the narrator is like that. That's why it is like that. It's a third person narrator who's always like at the outside, but then it gets into the character and start talking like with the voice of the character. And I really wanted that effect. And I also wanted to use language as a spice. For me, it's really important. I come from a culture that values the people who can talk and tell a good story. Not write a good book, but tell a good joke, for example, and with lots of curses and obscenity and profanity, the better. So for me, language and accent it's something that you have to build, of course, because you just don't put like a recorder and then transcribe everything, but you create a language. And I wanted to ask you in return about the language of Sarah. It is very difficult to see it in this translation. So I was hoping there will be a new one, because a lot of the spice of the South is a little bit lost here. And I wanted to ask you, because I really don't know many much details of your personal life, but I would love to hear why is this obsession with the South? Why the South accent, the South of the United States? What does it make you? What does it inspires you?
Well, it's interesting because West Virginia and where it is not, it isn't quite the South. It's kind of a different, it's not like the deep South.
Okay.
And it has been largely, it's changed more recently where they've built some highways, freeways, but it was largely kind of isolated, and it's in mountains and mountainous area, and there's a lot. I was able to take there's this kind of hillbilly culture that's considered hillbilly, and I grew up in Brooklyn, which was kind of considered hillbilly.
Okay.
So I took my, like where I grew up is now Brooklyn's very hip and cool. You know, everyone know, oh, Brooklyn, you grew up in Brooklyn. Well, in the 70s, it wasn't like that. So I was like a hillbilly, and I took that kind of upside down my world, my hillbilly New York world, and I transposed it in a world that really doesn't exist. The world in Sarah, we know, it's like Harry Potter world, you know?
Like Alice in Wonderland.
Yes, that's better. Yeah. And I took what I loved. I was very, very obsessed with West Virginian, anything I could read, because there was a way that the culture had stayed intact in terms of like magical realism. I was very into like Isabel Allende, and I loved magical realism. And I wanted to take something where I spent a lot of time, I'm Jewish, but I spent a lot of time in different Catholic churches, different churches. My mother was like, go, you know, just check it all out. Buddhism, and I love mythology, and I loved the weaving of Christianity with mythology. And it just seemed like this is a place where all these things could exist. And also the truth is, where can I place, we know that a trans person in a or gender non-conforming person in a truck stop being a prostitute, very often they are subjugated to more violence than gender conforming sex worker, right? They have higher levels of violence perpetrated against them. And here I flipped it on its head, you know? I flipped it completely. I created a world where I took what I wanted. What if, it's that idea of what if, you know? And I knew this world could not exist in Brooklyn. So I moved it and I made my own magical kingdom. I created a gourmet diner, you know? I never stopped myself and said, well, this isn't real. I took things that were true, that were factual, that I had collected, you know, as being a writer, like when you meet people and you're like, wow, you put that in your backpack.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And then and it's funny because you said 23, it's just like, I was 33 when I started, 32. Yeah, I just given birth to my son, so I'm nursing his baby, and I was kind of delusional and my son is now your age of what you were. And that's how old I was when I moved to San Francisco, with the idea of being a writer, and a complete mystery to myself. But it was just watching a movie and all these things that I needed to say. Yeah.
It's just to put you all in context. In the world of Sarah, this novel we're talking about, there's a diner at the truck stop that's gourmet. You know, like they serve like, you know, I don't remember really, but it's like duck with mango sorbet and rose hips and things like are super cool right now even, and back then it was, you know, something like really impossible. And there's also Glad, this like this sophisticated pimp who only hires like trans or non-conforming lizards, prostitutes.
Right.
There's like a market for this kind of exquisite service. And also there's another truck stop where the prostitutes go to worship a magic jackalope. Do you guys know what jackalope is? This mythical animal of the United States culture. It's a little rabbit with ants, with antlers. And it's a jackalope that has humongous antlers, and the prostitutes who have lost their powers, they go to him and worship him. And I mean, I can go on longer and go and on, just telling you this super weird and at the same time, you know, with a realistic edge, because, you know, there's truck stop where women sell their bodies to make a living, you know. And there's also like all this language that the characters use is just magnificent. They are always comparing. I don't know, it's just, you know, wild. But you know that in West Virginia, there are people talking like this. And in Brooklyn, there are people talking like this and making this super funny and aggressive comparisons. And, you know, it's just a wonderful novel. And I think it comes from a different place, that the heart is deceitful above all things.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You can, I love it because even if you can see it belongs, there's the same character.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like a mirroring each other's. It's like two different words. And where does the heart is deceitful come? What is the difference?
The heart is deceitful was basically just a pure rip and scream. I think it was Baldwin talks about, why would anyone want to be a writer? I'm paraphrasing. You're having to like cut and bleed out. Mm-hmm. And that's what that was. I was suicidal I wrote that mostly in my 20s. It's really struggling to choose to stay alive. And I never could come close to letting anyone know what was going on. I was very good at not saying what was. I mean, when I was in treatment, when I was removed from my family, my parents gave up custody, I'd been hospitalized. The strategy was the word trauma didn't enter the DSM, which is what they used to treat, until 1983. So that's the year I was put into a group home. So they did not address trauma. And it's funny, if you think today, everyone is like, I have so much trauma from, I mean, we are traumatized from what goes on in the news. That's very real, but you have to remember that wasn't even very available in our language. So they felt that to treat our trauma, PTSD was something that happened for a soldier who had either done something or seen something, right, in war. But they were aware of it, but it was still, for us, it was seen as we would be too destabilized as kids in treatment, that if they opened up those wounds, that it would destabilize us. So this is what the social worker said recently. It was basically structure, go to school, 3 hots in a cot. We give you food, we give you structure, and you get on with it. But it's like an infection in the sentence. If you've got this wound, it's, if you don't deal with it, it's going to fester.
Heal or disappear magically, right?
Yeah,
Right.
and writing was a way. My education was extremely spotty. I like hearing about. It's funny because I've heard from people who, you know, they went to graduate school and, you know, Iowa and blah blah blah, and they were like, oh, she cheated. It's like, no, girl, I worked harder actually. My last grade of completion was 6th grade. 7th grade I didn't complete because of an injury, and 8th grade I was chronic truant. I was just telling my son how when I was in the group home, I had a home instructor and they didn't even trust me with the books. I was given the comic book versions of books, which actually worked. And then I hustled my way into college, but because I had a writing teacher that, and my, you know, that need to tell, right? And I had a writing teacher who said girls have to write as girls and boys as boys. So back then,
Yeah.
in the 80s, like now you can't imagine them saying that, but you can also imagine a writing teacher like, oh my God, if I have to hear another boy writing a female voice. And I said to her, please, I can't write in a female voice. I was writing about physical and sexual abuse. And she wouldn't let me do what I had been doing. And so I started writing in a female voice, and it felt so disgusting to me and horrible. And I have an addiction in the group home. If you were to have a drug or alcohol problem, you got treatment. I used food, and there was no treatment available. They just didn't take that seriously, and I couldn't stop eating, and I felt that was my way of numbing myself, of protecting myself from feeling. That's what I used. And just to be able to show up and function, I couldn't anymore. And I had to drop out. I ended up going into a hospital. It's like, no, I needed to use that male voice. But
there is always like this prejudice, right? I think I never got a writing professor who ordered me to write in a female voice, but there's always like this tacit imperative to conform to the scheme that is written for you, right? I remember that when I start writing, I will always choose male protagonists or male subjects, and I was really, as a child, I preferred the male company all the time, and even when I was younger, when I was like 5 or a 6-year-old, I really wish I could be a boy, you know, and it is something that has a lot of, I've tried to explore that feeling and that necessity, that fantasy, because it was a fantasy, and it had a lot to do with how I saw women back then, how the struggles of my mother, you know, and the way my dad treated her, and the way society treated women. And even when I resorted to books at a very early age. I loved novels. I loved books. And in books, you could only find like interesting male characters. It was like girls never went into an adventure. Girls were always doing boring
unless they're
stuff.
sexy or seductive,
Exactly.
or, you know.
Exactly.
You know, it's being recorded, so you know, it's
and you know, it is always like this. I felt like a freak, you know, all the time, because I had this like hidden secret desire to be something different. But it just then took me to the realization that there are really many ways of being a woman, and that my own way was always a way of being a woman, and that I could write about whatever I wanted. If I wanted to write about boys, I will write about boys, because boys are an important part of my life. And also I'm always all the time struggling to understand him. For me, it's something really important to understand why men are like that, and why do they exert an obsession over women, and also a violence, and many other things, of course.
Yeah, I was interested in violence in your work and the use of violence and how you show violence, because I think we both explore violence. There's a difference, as you said, between the heart and Sarah in terms of the violence in Sarah is way more overt. It's out there, and I will never write like that again. And there was nothing holding me back. And I think that it's funny, I put that book out after Sarah, and to me I had gotten better in my craft as a writer. I'd stopped writing for about 3 years. It was around 3 years between so like some of the stories in the heart. And then when I went back to put out the heart, I saw some of the problems, but when I started fixing it, I was messing with something that felt.
It belonged to another era. I know, I think you can tell. I always thought that Sarah should be the second book, not the first one.
Yeah,
because there's something more primal in the material of the heart. And I have not talked about Harold's End because unfortunately I haven't been able to get it.
I'll have to send it to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only one I haven't been able to get. The only one, I think it was it was out of print for some time, and now you have a new version, right?
No, it's still not available, but I mean, I have it. I'll send it to you then.
Oh, that will be like,
The illustrations are beautiful with Cherry Hood did the illustrations, but Carla, you should ask some of the questions about.
Well, I have some questions for you, but I was so delighted of what you were saying that I wasn't able to think at all. But well, I have a few questions that in some way you have answered during the conversation, but I know that Laura has something to tell us about gender and performative stuff. So I want to make the questions. First of all, I want to ask you both, how do you perceive violence in the development of your characters, and how does violence, direct, structural, cultural violence, shape not only the backstory of your characters, but the conflict of your novels? So I don't know who wants to answer first.
Fernanda,
Fernanda, perfect.
Okay. This is I know it's always a very difficult question to answer for me, because violence is this phenomena in our human nature that if you talk about it lightly, it kind of gets it becomes like a little bit superficial. So I really think violence is part of who we are as human beings. Is something that goes with us as a species, I think. And I think society has mechanism for manage it, for tame it. And I think for me, it's, I don't know, I've been obsessed about violence since I was a little kid. I always liked horror stories and true crime stories, and it was something that used to shame me, to give me shame, because I thought I was like this morbid, like, a person who, I don't know, it has like a bad reputation to be attracted to violence, right? And now I see it in a different light, because I think in a society like ours, in Mexico, but not only in Mexico, I see it everywhere, in the States too. And I think it's modern culture or contemporary culture that pushes us to the extremes. And I don't know. I think for me, it's just trying to understand why it happens and how it happens, and trying to put that into the light. It's like we are all cavemen, and we are talking about violence is like sitting in front of a fire and talking about what scares us. For me, horror stories and true crime stories are like that. It's a way of talking together about what worries us, about what scares us. And it takes a huge part of what I've done until now. I don't know if that's going to be like that in the future, because I'm feeling like this subject is kind of losing its appeal for me. It's violence. But at least in my two first novels and the one that's coming next, Paradise, I think it plays a huge part. Me trying to get to know why is that, and what is happening with us as a society.
I think that one thing that strikes me about your work is it's not writing for deadened sensibilities. That I think of work that's transgressive is just sort of like, I'm going to throw something at the wall to shock you, because people are so deadened that it's just like, I remember when I was a punk, I wanted to go to the most violent horror movies I could. Just what was the worst horror, whatever was the most horrifying violence that I could see. And it's because I felt so numb and deadened. And I don't want to write for deadened sensibilities. And I feel that what you're doing in your work is you're exploring horrendous violence where we don't even see it, where it's just life is, there have been these articles about prisoners dying of COVID, and how they're treating prisoners, all what's going on at the border, okay? The children that are still there, the children who have been separated, who can't find their parents, the children who are now, or people who are in immigration detention camps, and what's going on.
Kept in cages, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and now with COVID, where they are keeping them in isolation. These are forms of violence that go on if you can keep things quiet and silent. I am obsessed with how do we ask people to bear witness, because once you have skin in the game, if I'm just writing violence to titillate, then I'm part of that. Because I think there's a human nature that it's like we see a car crash and we're like, if I'm giving you skin in the game and I'm telling you a story and I'm allowing you to be invested, that's what moves us from like the caveman mentality of not giving a fuck and knowing that we are all connected. Why do you care? Why should you care about that child in the cage? Why should you care about a prisoner, about people in jail who are dying, who haven't even been charged? We are supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, and you have people who are dying just being held. If we do not have storytelling, I mean, I read about the horrendous violence against women that it depends where, and how long it takes. We have that here where there'll be someone who's preying on prostitutes, often trans women, and nobody cares, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I do believe that storytelling is critical to then allow people to suddenly give a fuck, and then that
Mm-hmm.
informs the political.
To make things visible.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And then if it's not visible, well, how do you make it visible? You know, for me, the problem was, yeah, it's like, okay, so I camouflaged it. I made a blonde haired, blue eyed boy that, you know, it's like very often we are Darwinian, you know, it caught your eye. And it caught your eye. And like you said, that cover, that I had nothing to do with that cover, but
Mm-hmm.
it caught your eye, and that's fine. We are creatures. I mean, they've done studies, and our eye will spend more time on a pretty baby, whatever our culture decides is pretty, whatever the wiring is. We will look more at a pretty baby than what, for whatever reason, we are wired to think it's not an attractive baby. You know, it's our wiring. So if that's what I got to do to get you to open it and be receptive to something different, if you got a problem with that, you know, if I didn't bring the goods, then okay, you know, but it's there because, as you said, you know, it's the felt authenticity of the experience, and that's what you're exploring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's what Billy Corgan says in the preface of the new version of Sarah. He says something about that the proof that J.T. Libros exists and existed is the works, you know, and that's who you are too, and that's authentic and truth.
Yes, yeah, and that's exactly. I mean, that's what brings us together.
Yeah.
But we don't blink. It's, you know, it's like you can say our work is dark, but seeing in the dark is beautiful, you know. And there's this quote that says the heart breaks and breaks and lives by breaking, and also by laughing. You know, with Sarah, there's humor. There's a lot of humor. I think it's actually pretty funny, but I'm also holding, it's never farce, and I'm holding that. There's also that real violence. It's life or death, you know. I mean, for a long time, and it's funny because everything in Sarah really happened. You know what? If you think about it, and there was a point where I was writing it where I started crying, where they're chasing him and he's revealed to be what he's not, and they've turned him into, you know, he was a saint and now he's like a witch, right?
Yeah.
And they're hunting him, and they want to kill him and burn him at the stake, you know, the witch. I think we both relate to that.
And he's naked and exposed, and he has nobody to nobody is looking for him, and yeah, totally kind of identified.
Who finds him and says, "What were you thinking?" And he's like, I didn't mean for any of this to happen, you know. And that's exactly it. And everything that I wrote, you know, like held in a prison, put in servitude. It's like all of that revealed to be what you're not, and ultimately rescued, you know. But then having to sit with, well, we won't reveal the ending.
Yeah, no, we don't want to do that. No, you guys must read Sarah and the Heart is Deceitful above all things. And again, I'm going to work so hard to get your books translated in Spanish again. You'll see.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, I'll move my, the strings.
What are you
Yes, please, we need them in Spanish. I read them in English for this conversation.
Ah, you read them in English.
Yeah, but I was like struggling a little. I need them in Spanish a little too, please. So that would be great.
It's beautiful working with translators. I think the books were really done beautifully in Italian because she really worked with me, and also in Japan. And when I went back, the Japanese translator is a very respected writer, and it was very moving to me when I went back with the author to JT. I was scared they would be mad at me, like, oh, you lied. And in Japan, they absolutely understood shame, having
Of
shame
course.
on yourself, you hold back. I really thought that they would be mad at me for taking away the cute blonde-haired little boy, like cute. And it was like, no, they actually understood better, because they understood having the private self that is, is kept in shame. And the man who's, like I said, a university, a famous poet, he said the work endures, and he's spent so much time, and we got to meet, and it was very moving to show the film, and they did a beautiful job with the translations for the movie. And I met with people of all ages, and one thing that you said is permission. What I found is so many people of all ages would come to me, and I would do this thing where I say, it's, the myth of Dumbo's feather. Dumbo has a magic feather, and if he has this magic feather, he can fly. But we know it's not the feather. It's just the illusion. So I would do this and say, I would ask them permission to touch them, right? And I say, I'm going to put my hands here, and then I ask them permission to touch their head. I said, I'm going to give you permission to write whatever you need, however you need to.
Beautiful.
And when the permission, when it runs out, here I give them my card, and you have permission. It runs out, contact me, and I'll give you more. Because we need that.
Yeah. We need that. That's exactly.
I think some are born with it. I don't know if more men have it, just kind of like, but I think especially writing about what we write about.
Yeah, that's it.
And the way we write about it, and to have someone that says, yes, you have permission. Yes, do it,
In a way, I like the idea of JT being sort of Peter Pan, he's never going to grow up. He'll always be like that. We'll never see him, like old and changed and contradicting himself, as everyone, who grows up ends up doing. So he's kind of like Marilyn Monroe right now, like frozen in time. And I think that's a beautiful idea too. And you can be free now from him, and that's cool.
What's crazy is he would be 40. He'd be turning 40 years old.
My God.
He'd be getting his Trans Am, having a middle-age crisis. Yeah, I mean, it was very freeing to me. What's funny is when I was out there, doing, JT, I was also Speedy, and Speedy wasn't me. But there are some people that assumed that because Speedy was female, Speedy, when they met me as Speedy, well, that must be me. And it was very difficult for me to get it. No, you've never met me. You're meeting me for the first time. And being able to allow those aspects of myself out allowed me to move into myself. Because if you come from trauma, learning how to be inside your own skin is not necessarily something that comes easily. And people who do not have that that experience have a hard time understanding it, right? Like, so they looked at what I did and they see this, and it's like, I'm like, okay, but actually it's this. Everything, you know, and it's interesting to me that I've had so few conversations actually about the work and more about the extra of it, and people using the extra of it to remove the what's the messages and what's available in the work. And if you go back to the work, it's all fucking there.
Well, we are running out of time, but I don't know if you want to add some few words after we close the talk. I loved everything you said. I was like crying most of the time, but it was so beautiful to have you. And I want to know if you want to add something to this conversation.
Well, I just think it's wonderful to listen to your path of how to sit still, like you were saying in one of your interviews, Fernanda, about how hard it is to sit and tell a story when there's so many distractions. We get pings, we get to sit and read, but there's a part of our brain that is activated that doesn't come through any other medium. I mean, if they've done the studies, but to be able to, and right now we're so polarized and having people, I mean, this person, Charlie Jane Anders, said this thing saying that I was a cis, white, middle-aged, you know, or often a little mother of one, you know, and it's like, first of all, how dare you? How dare you? This is a trans woman. Come and try to tell me how I identify, and or tell me what is true for me, and that I somehow in my books took something from someone else. No, I wrote about my truth and I opened a space for then there to be more of this type of story to be told. And when you write about what's the violence that's going on against trans people, against women, against people who are perceived as other, whenever we do that, I mean, we're not there writing, you know, romance novels. There's a place for that, but we're not doing that. And we need to be supporting each other instead of finding reasons. I think a lot of times people, they have their own reasons why they need to knock you down, or they need to like put like a box around you and say what you are or what you aren't. And our job, it sucks that we have to spend energy pushing back against that, because it's so fucking hard just to get heard, just to give ourselves permission, just to move aside our own sense of shame, just to go in deep. And like, I'm working right now on my story of like in the group home stuff, and I move it out. I say, okay, I take the character. I mean, I wanted to talk to you more about what you're working on now and how you do it, but I'll write a scene, so I'm talking about, I'll put it in third person and I'll say, well, what is Laura and Maureen, what do they need to tell me? Because that makes it safer for me, because it took me a long time to be able to write. And I just feel like our job, being of service to others, is to find reasons why people should tell as honestly as they can, however that needs to look like. And to try not to tell them what they are or are not. You know, if you don't like it, don't read it, you know. Don't put a coffin lid on it, because I get the emails from people, as you know.
Yeah.
You know, it's like your work saves lives. People read your work and they're like, oh my God, someone's telling a story that I see reflected. Someone is going to pick up your book and wow, this is me. There's nobody like me in this village. And this woman is telling my story. And that's to feel not alone, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel witnessed. We are bearing witness. That's it.
Thank you so much. I would like to add, it is, as you said, it is so difficult to bear one's soul already, and let's concentrate in reading each other with respect. And I just cannot encourage you more to read Laura's Albert's books and under the synonym of J.T. Leroy. And por favor, léanla, es una escritora increíble y grandiosa, y les va a encantar, de verdad. And that's it. And I will really like to thank to everyone who's been accompanying us tonight. And Laura, this has been, it is a dream come true for me. I admire you a lot. Thank you so much. And thanks for sharing us really, really deep and beautiful truths. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting this. And I just want to say, because this is a really dark time, and then the emails I get, the messages I get are people saying that they don't have hope. And I know what that is. And when I've gone and traveled around the world, I've always met someone that says that they don't want to live anymore. And I really, I know what that is. And I think if we can buy another day for someone, for each other, to be available to an adjacent possible. And that's what storytelling is. And that I have been alive for this, to hear that this reached you, that it found you, the message in a bottle. And it's phenomenal.
I love you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, Hector, who was the interpreter of this conversation. Thank you, Alan, that was behind all this. And I'm so glad. We're so happy. Tiempo de Literatura is so glad to have you both here talking. And read Laura Albert books. Read Fernanda Melchor. I know that you all know already, but read her, please. Read Laura Albert. And Cultura UABC is so happy to have you. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for staying this an hour. And we are so glad. Good evening. Good night. There's nothing more to say. Thank you.
Adiós, chao.
Nos vemos.